Okay, boys, so we're doing the political compass today. Now, granted, I actually did do this a couple of other times outside of the channel. I did it years ago, and I got a different answer than I got when I most recently took it, which was actually yesterday. I fully expect to get the same answers I did yesterday, because I took it yesterday, but I'm doing it for video now, just to kind of, to show you guys how my political compass turns out. Now, I do think that this test has some stupid questions. I do think that it's certainly not absolutist. And there's some that, there's certain answers that should be there that aren't, like, neutral or something like that. And some of these should be less vague, but they're intentionally vague, so let's go for it. So, if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. I would agree. I don't think we would want to serve corporations more than humanity. So I think if economic globalization was, in fact, inevitable, which I don't believe it is, I'm against globalism, but if it was, then I would say, yes, that it should definitely serve humanity rather than the interests of corporations. I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. No, I wouldn't. If they were in the wrong, I wouldn't support it. I'm not an absolutist with that either, obviously. Right and wrong are much more important to me than, which side is, more than tribalism, I should say. No one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Now, this is actually one that I've changed over time. I used to agree, but now I strongly disagree. And let me explain why. I'm not saying you think that you're better than someone, right? But I think that having pride in where you come from isn't inherently a bad thing, especially here with the U.S., because we're a nation of ideas, not a nation of race. We are based, primarily on our ideals, and that's what makes us as a country. So in that regard, I don't necessarily think it's wrong to be proud. I think if you're over prideful, that's a problem. But I don't think being proud in and of itself is inherently bad. Our race has many superior qualities compared to other races? No. There are differences, for sure. But I don't think any race is inherently superior to others. So that's kind of a trick question, because there are different qualities to different races. But overall, I would say no. Absolutely not. The enemy of the enemy is my friend. You see, that's a tough one. Theoretically, yes, but I would actually disagree with that. Because just because you have a common enemy doesn't mean you're going to side with each other. And, granted, enemies can side together against a common threat. It happens all the time. But I think that thinking the enemy of the enemy is my friend is a dangerous train of thought, because you're likely to get stabbed in the back if you always have that mentality. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Yeah, it is sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, that's unfortunately in the nature of how some things end up playing out. War is conflict, what can you say? There's now worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Abso-fucking-lutely there is. Look at the news, it is inherently biased. And then you get shit like TMZ, super, trying to pretend it's news when it's just a bunch of celebrity gossip and shit. Absolutely. People are ultimately divided by class more than nationality? Yes, I would say so, yes. I think that no matter what background you come from, poverty is more of an issue than nationality or ethnicity or race, things like that. I think those are much bigger factors that divide people. And some people may disagree with that because of the current climate, but personally I think that when you boil it right down to it, I think that class is much more important. I'm not saying that there's anything that can really be done about that, but I'm just saying that is more of a divisive line. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I disagree. I think controlling unemployment is much more important, although I don't know if we should necessarily have intervention in either one. What constitutes controlling, you know what I mean? But I think unemployment is a bigger threat than inflation. Not by much, they're both pretty bad. And they kind of can go hand in hand, but I do think unemployment is more important. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect their environment, they require regulation. Yeah, I would agree, they require regulation. Not a lot of regulation. I'm very pro-small regulation, right? I don't think that we should absolutely regulate the ever-living fuck out of them, but I think that a little bit of regulation here and there is a good thing. It needs a balance, you know what I mean? From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. Fuck off, commie. Strongly disagree. The freer the market, the freer the people. Well, I would agree. I would ultimately agree. I'm not a full-on ANCAP, but I do think the free market is inherently a good thing. And theoretically, yes, the freer the market, the freer the people. There are certain discrepancies with that, but I would say for the most part, yes. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. This is another one I've actually changed opinions on. Strongly disagree. I think anything that can be a commodity can be. I don't think that, just because something is sold as a product necessarily means that it shouldn't be. I think that if there's a demand, there can be a supply. I have no problem with that. And bottled water can be very useful if, public water sources get tainted or something. So, I think that no, absolutely not. That is perfectly fine that bottled water exists. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Strongly disagree. Land is definitely a commodity to be bought and sold. I'm all for private property. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Soft agree on that. I think if you can learn to play the game, but I also think it is regrettable, for sure. I think that everyone should try to contribute to society in one way or another, but ultimately, don't hate the player, hate the game. I guess that is kind of what this is getting at. So I do kind of agree. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes we need to have, tariffs and, import taxes and stuff like that. I think sometimes that is necessary. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver profit to its shareholders. I would say for the most part, yes. I think that their employees should be looked after too. But the only social responsibility, really, I do think, is to deliver a profit to its shareholders, ultimately. The rich are too highly taxed. I agree. The rich are much more highly taxed than people realize. There are ways around it, for sure, that the super rich can use. But I would ultimately agree the rich are too highly taxed. I am much more in support of, a flat percentage, which not everyone is, and I understand why. But I do think the rich are much more highly taxed than people realize. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards for medical care. Look, healthcare, ethically, I think is important, and I think ethically everyone should have access to it. But, people are doing a job to do healthcare, so that's why I ultimately don't think it can be boiled down to a right? I think that your rights can't require someone else's labor. As much as I would like them to in this instance, we can't split hairs and pick and choose with that. And I think if you can afford higher medical care, like let's say plastic surgery, that's something that's unnecessary. I think if you're able to afford better plastic surgery, then you should have the access to it like that. You know what I mean? Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Abso-fucking-lutely they should. They should absolutely penalize them. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Strongly agree. Monopolies are a very bad thing, and we've seen them pop up recently with certain tech platforms, but we won't get into that. But yeah, monopolies I'm completely against. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Now, this is one that I've also kind of changed on. Not really, because I've always been pro-life. I made that clear. But I used to do soft disagree here, but I actually do soft agree now, and let me explain why. I do think when the woman's life is not threatened, it should theoretically be illegal, because, like I said, in my eyes, it is murder. People could make the argument that a black market would arise and cause, mass deaths that way, and I could see that as a valid argument. However, from what I've heard, a lot of the people who say that are exaggerating the effect that would have. I don't know if that's true, because I don't think we've ever done it. And if we have, I certainly wasn't alive to do it. But I also do think that there are a couple other instances where this isn't the case, so that's why I used to say soft disagree. For instance, and technically I do still think this, like let's say the baby has anencephaly. Anencephaly is a horrible disorder, and the baby typically will not live for more than a couple of days. So if the baby is anencephalic, I'm all for it. I think that they should get it taken out because it's less cruel to the baby. And I can empathize more with people when it's like extenuating circumstances like rape or incest. But in all honesty, I don't think that abortion should be the first instinct when it comes to that either. I think that to say that it's necessary just because, these tragic circumstances is unfair because you're cheating someone else out of a chance at life. And I think that for me, that trumps anything. Now, to be fair, like I said, I'm more empathetic to people in extenuating circumstances, and I think that this question is incomplete because if it included things like if the baby's health as well is threatened, that's another one. But given the question as it is phrased, I would have to soft agree because as I said, I am pro-life, and I do view abortion as murder inherently. I don't necessarily judge people who feel differently on that because I think that it's a matter of perspective when it comes to this issue. But I do think it is an issue that there's not really a fence with the abortion issue. You're either for it or against it. Or rather, you're either pro-life or pro-choice. Or you're in the extreme and you're pro-abortion. I think that there's a lot of people that are pro-choice and they say make it safe, legal, and rare. I actually think that those people are fairly moderate, and I actually empathize a lot with that viewpoint. But then there's other people, there's 7 states where you can get 9-month abortions, up until the point of birth. Fuck that. All authority should be questioned. I agree. Inherently, I do still think that all authority should be questioned. I don't think that you should necessarily rebel all the time, but I think that to a degree, you shouldn't just unquestioningly accept authority. I think you should bring some questioning to the table. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Strongly disagree. I'm very against vengeance and retaliation. I understand that if you are attacked, defending yourself, but I don't believe in just going as a blanket statement. I don't believe in just revenge. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Yeah, I agree. I think if they can't hold themselves up, then we shouldn't have to foot the bill. I'd say it's unfortunate because I think museums are important. I don't really go to the theater. I don't go to see plays and stuff. But ultimately, it would sadden me if museums shut down, but ultimately, if they can't afford to keep themselves open, why should we foot the bill if we're not going to visit them in the first place? You know what I mean? Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Agree. Absolutely. I think that there is a fine line with that. I do think education can be important. I think our current education system is flawed and fucking terrible. But I do think that school can be important, but I don't think it should be compulsory. I think truant officers and things like that are kind of unnecessary. All people have their rights, but it's better for all of us that different sorts of people keep to their own kind. No, fuck off with that. See, that's racial talk right there, and division, and fuck that. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Yeah, sure. I would say in some cases, absolutely. I think that there is a wide variety of parenting tactics that are used, and sometimes you need to get hands-on. It is what it is. It is natural for children to keep secrets from their parents. Agree. Absolutely. Strongly agree. I think that in nature, people just do tend to do that. I know I sure as hell did when I was a kid. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree. I don't think it should be. I don't personally partake. I've never really been a fan of it. I think stoners can be annoying, but I don't think it should be a criminal offense just possessing it for personal use. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. Strongly agree. Absolutely, it should be. I think that schooling should equip people to find jobs. That's the whole fucking point of it. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Strongly disagree. No one has a right to say who can or can't reproduce. The most important thing is that children learn to accept discipline. I would say to an extent, yes. There are other things that are very important as well. But children are kind of unruly and kind of over the top. I do think it is kind of important that they do kind of fall in line to an extent. There are no savage and civilized peoples. There are only different cultures. Strongly disagree. You have things like human sacrifice, cannibalism, certain countries where rape is accepted and, people are executed for sexual beliefs and stuff like that. So, no, there are certainly savage cultures. I'm not going to define what makes that or what doesn't make that, but I do think cultures that inherently accept violence against each other are kind of savage. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I agree. I think that if you're able to work, you probably should. When you are troubled, it's better to not think about it, but to keep busy on more cheerful things. To an extent, I agree. I think you do have to face your problems, but I do think that wallowing in them can be a really big problem. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Disagree. I'll just say regular disagree. But I do think, no, that is false. I think there's plenty of first-generation immigrants that blend in and, become part of society really well. And I think that there's plenty of really respectable first-generation immigrants, and I think that that's unfair to them to say that. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Disagree. Absolutely not. Not always. Maybe sometimes, but no. Corporations have their own self-interest, for sure. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Strongly agree. I think that broadcasting institutions should prop themselves up. I think that to have them publicly funded by the taxpayer is wrong. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Yeah, I would say that they certainly have been. There were things like the Patriot Act and stuff like that, which were absolutely despicable. There was the whole NSA debacle a few years back. So yeah, I would agree. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in democratic political systems. Strongly disagree. That those arguments that delay, that's political discourse, and it is absolutely necessary for building a better society, to have people talk back and forth to each other. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. Absolutely not. Privacy is important, and surveillance is wrong. End of story. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. This is another one I've actually changed on more or less recently. Strongly disagree. I am very against the death penalty. I don't think that the state should have the right to execute someone after they are in captivity. If it is a matter of defending themselves or the public, that's a different story. But after the fact, I think that the death penalty is wrong. In civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. See, this is a really tricky one, because I'm not an anarchist, so ultimately I would soft agree. But I could also see it as being disagreed, because I'm not a big guy on authority in general, but I do agree. I think that, for the most part, to have a hierarchy does help society stay stable. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Agree. I think that there's a lot of nonsense that people say is art, and I personally think that it's just a bunch of bullshit. But here's the thing. That's my subjective opinion. I don't know. Again, I don't think art inherently can really be objectively analyzed. I think to an extent it can, certain aspects of it. But no, I would agree. A bunch of hokey bullshit that people say is art probably isn't art. Like, a girl who bottled her pee and put it in the fridge for like a month. That I don't consider that art. I consider that this girl needs to be institutionalized. But that's all I think. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Strongly disagree. I'm very big on redemption and rehabilitation. I do think punishment can be important for sure, but for me, redemption is much, much more important because I'm a big believer in redemption. So this goes hand in hand. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminal. Strongly disagree. I think that giving up on anyone is a pessimistic doomer way to look at it. The business person and manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I agree. I think that they contribute more to society. Just the writer and the artist, I think, can actually be businessmen. They can be entrepreneurs. So I think that that's an unfair comparison. But I think if we're just boiling them down to very basic terms, then yes, business person and manufacturer are more important. Mothers have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Okay, now, mothers may have careers. That is important. But their first duty is to be homemakers. I would agree. I would agree that both parents need to be homemakers. They both need to, give a good life for their children. And I do think that there are roles that mothers and fathers do tend to play, and I think that those should be the first duty. I think that men can be stay-at-home dads, and I think that mothers can be career women. But I think ultimately their first duty is to their family and their home, yes. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Sure. That sounds plausible, but I have no idea. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Here's the thing. I hate the establishment. And I would say actually do go against it. You know what? Yeah, let's disagree. This is actually what I'm answering differently than yesterday because I'm thinking about it more. The establishment, although I think making peace with it, quote-unquote, can be a good thing, I am anti-establishment, and I think the establishment is a problem. I think that ultimately accepting the facts of life is important, which is why I did originally say agree. But we're going to disagree this time. Astrology accurately explains many things. No. Look, it's fun, and there are certain people that I think it can explain, but I don't think that that's necessarily causation. I think that's more coincidence. So I disagree. You cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. I would agree. Some people are naturally unlucky. I would agree. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. No, I'm not going to say what's moral and what isn't with that. That's bullshit. That's not... I disagree. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Absolutely. I think that as long as they're fit to have a child, then I don't have a problem with it. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Strongly agree. What goes on in the private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Strongly agree. No one can naturally feel homosexual. Disagree with that. I think that it does happen in nature, number one, and we see it with people all the time. The openness about sex has gone too far. You know what? I would actually agree with that. I think that we are a little too open. I'm not necessarily against being open about it, but I think sometimes we cross the line and be gratuitous more than we need to. I'm not necessarily against being over gratuitous either. I mean, I watch and review hentai, so yeah. Well, let's see. All right. Okay, so as you can see, I'm 1.75 on the right, and negative 3.49 into the libertarian. So I lean libertarian, lean right, but I'm fairly close to the central. So, yeah, this is actually slightly different, although I did answer a couple of questions slightly differently than yesterday. But this is more or less where I stand now. That, like I said, I do typically identify as center-right, and more libertarian than authoritarian, absolutely. So I think that this is fairly accurate. I don't think it's the end-all, be-all, but I do think that that does pretty accurately represent me. So yeah, that's the political compass. I hope you enjoyed. Doodles.
You made a reservation under the King of the Swing?
Yeah, of course, my horse.